One day they disappeared, no explanation, no closure, silence, and they expected you to break. They expected you to chase, to beg, to question your worth, but something unexpected happened. You walked away. Calm, quiet, final. And that single decision shocked them more than any argument ever could. This moment isn't about heartbreak. It's about power. It's about shadow, psychology, and the kind of masculine maturity that doesn't react, it withdraws. Today, we expose why a narcissist panics when you refuse to chase, how this triggers their deepest shadow, and why walking away is the ultimate act of when a narcissist ghosts. It is rarely random. It is rarely born from genuine indifference. It is a deliberate, calculated act designed to control, manipulate, and provoke reaction. Understanding why a narcissist ghosts requires understanding their psychology, not in terms of normal human emotion, but in terms of what drives a personality that thrives on dominance, validation, and the ability to unsettle others. Ghosting is not about communication breakdown. It is about power dynamics. The disappearance is meant to create imbalance, to unsettle, and to test how far you are willing to bend to maintain their attention. They want to see if you will chase, if you will break, if you will make yourself small in order to be allowed back into their orbit. The first reason narcissists ghost is control. Control is their primary currency. Everything they do revolves around creating situations where they are the focal point of emotional energy. When they ghost, they are creating a vacuum of uncertainty. A vacuum is magnetic. Humans are wired to resolve uncertainty, to seek closure, to repair broken narratives. The narcissist exploits this natural instinct. They understand that when they disappear, the person they have ghosted will fill the silence with thought, worry, and action. In that moment, they are in control even without interaction. The ghosting is not passive, it is active manipulation. Another reason is validation. Narcissists are addicted to confirmation that they are valued, desired, and central to someone else's emotional life. When they ghost, they are testing this. They want to see if you care enough to chase. The chase is their reward. It validates their significance. If you run to them, beg for explanations, or apologize for imagined wrongs, they perceive it as a confirmation of their power. Your pursuit becomes proof of their importance. Ghosting is rarely an absence, it is a calculated pause, an invisible leash that measures your attachment to them. Ghosting also creates emotional dependency. By vanishing without explanation, they produce anxiety, confusion, and rumination. Your mind spins, your imagination fills in gaps. Why did they disappear? Did I do something wrong? Is there still hope? This emotional turbulence is exactly what they seek. It positions them as the center of your internal world, even in their absence. In effect, their silence does more than words ever could. Silence becomes a tool of emotional leverage. And if you do not recognize it, you may fall into the trap of giving them even more attention, mentally and emotionally, than if they had been present. Importantly, ghosting is also a test of boundaries. Narcissists are constantly evaluating who will tolerate their behavior and who will not. Disappearing is a way to probe your limits. Will you chase? Will you compromise your dignity to regain access? Will you allow your emotions to be hijacked by their absence? Your reactions, or lack thereof, communicate volumes to them. Every text you send, every call you make, every attempt to analyze their behavior is a response that they record unconsciously. They are measuring your emotional elasticity. They want to know what they can push, pull, and bend within you. At a deeper level, ghosting exposes the narcissist's fear of vulnerability. Most people do not understand this. A narcissist disappears not just to manipulate, but because facing authentic connection is terrifying. True intimacy threatens the carefully curated self-image they maintain. By vanishing, they avoid exposure to scrutiny, accountability, or genuine emotional engagement. Ghosting is a preemptive defense mechanism. It shields them from the discomfort of real connection while simultaneously keeping someone on the hook. It is paradoxical. The act of disappearing is a display of both power and fear, dominance and fragility, aggression and avoidance. From a psychological standpoint, ghosting exploits universal human needs. The need for understanding, the need for closure, and the need for emotional reciprocity. When these needs are unmet, tension arises. Your nervous system becomes alert. Your subconscious mind begins to create narratives. You replay interactions, analyze words, and imagine scenarios. This mental activity is exactly what a narcissist wants. They do not need to engage directly to maintain influence over your thoughts and emotions. Their absence achieves this effortlessly. The vacuum they create becomes a stage upon which you perform, rehearsing for an audience that is no longer physically present. Ghosting also leverages the human tendency to overvalue what is scarce. When something or someone is absent, the mind often inflates their importance. This principle, known in behavioral psychology as scarcity effect, plays directly into narcissistic strategies. By withdrawing, they create perceived value. They generate tension between availability and desire. You may feel compelled to reclaim their attention, to restore balance, or to reestablish connection, and in doing so, you place yourself on the narcissist's terms. Every attempt to regain what was withdrawn strengthens their position. Scarcity creates pursuit, and pursuit fuels validation. The act of ghosting is rarely final in the narcissist's mind. It is a tool for future engagement. They disappear not to sever the relationship entirely, but to increase the impact of their eventual return. They understand the psychology of suspense and anticipation. When they reappear, they hope you will have been altered by their absence. They hope you will have chased, hoped, and compromised in ways that make them feel more powerful. Ghosting is a rehearsal of emotional scripts, designed to ensure that when they return, they occupy the stage as the central figure. In this way, the disappearance is never truly empty. It is full of calculated expectation. A narcissist may also ghost because they are avoiding accountability. If a pattern of behavior, argument, or confrontation arises that exposes their flaws, guilt, or vulnerability, they may vanish to sidestep the discomfort. This is often misinterpreted by the person on the receiving end as disinterest, rejection, or malice. In reality, it is avoidance of the internal shadow, the parts of themselves they refuse to confront. Ghosting is a projection of their fear of self-examination onto the other person. You are left holding questions, but they are avoiding their own. Ghosting triggers reflection and self-evaluation in the person on the receiving end, often unintentionally. The narcissist's absence functions like a psychological mirror. It forces you to confront your reactions, your emotional dependencies, and your boundaries. Many individuals, when ghosted, immediately internalize blame. They question their worth. They doubt their actions. This is intentional. Narcissists rely on projection, shifting responsibility, and creating self-doubt. Their absence is a catalyst for the other person to examine themselves, often leading them into a reactive cycle that reinforces the narcissist's sense of superiority. However, the underlying motivation is consistently the same: control. Ghosting is about influence without overt action. It demonstrates that power can be exerted through absence just as effectively as through presence. The narcissist is measuring how you respond, analyzing your emotional patterns, and determining whether you are malleable or resilient. They are testing the elasticity of your emotional boundaries and your capacity to tolerate uncertainty. Every reaction they observe, anxiety, fear, frustration, or pursuit, is a confirmation of influence. And when you resist, their expectations are violated, creating internal shock. Ghosting is also a strategic withdrawal. Much like a predator stepping back to see if prey will follow, the narcissist removes themselves to gauge attachment. They are assessing your capacity to self-regulate, your ability to retain dignity under pressure, and your willingness to prioritize yourself over their manipulations. The ghosting is a silent litmus test for maturity. Your response, or lack thereof, signals whether you are susceptible to their psychological games. Every attempt to chase or explain is counted as a point in their favor. Every refusal, every calm boundary is a disruption of their expectations. It's important to recognize that ghosting is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of the narcissist's needs, fears, and limitations. They operate from a framework that prioritizes self-preservation, dominance, and validation over empathy, accountability, and genuine connection. The act of disappearing is a symptom of that framework. Understanding this distinction is vital because it allows you to detach emotionally from their behavior. When you see ghosting as a strategic act rooted in their psychology, it becomes less about personal rejection and more about observing human behavior at its most manipulative. Ultimately, ghosting is a deliberate act designed to elicit reaction, measure control, and reinforce narcissistic validation. It is a test, a projection, a manipulation, and a defense mechanism all at once. It targets your natural human instincts, your desire for understanding, your craving for closure, your need for emotional connection. It functions as a mirror, revealing both the narcissist's limitations and the reactive tendencies you may carry within yourself. Understanding the mechanics of ghosting is the first step toward reclaiming power, setting boundaries, and responding from a position of strength rather than reactivity. When you comprehend the underlying intent of ghosting, you begin to see it not as an attack, but as a predictable behavioral pattern. You recognize the signals, understand the motivations, and anticipate the manipulations. This awareness transforms vulnerability into strategy. The vacuum they create no longer holds power over you. Silence is no longer a weapon, it becomes neutral space. Their attempt to manipulate through absence is neutralized because you refuse to participate in the game on their terms. Awareness is empowerment. Understanding is liberation. In conclusion, when a narcissist ghosts, they are exercising control, seeking validation, testing boundaries, projecting fear, and manipulating emotional responses. They do it because absence exerts influence just as effectively as presence, because scarcity creates pursuit, and because human psychology is hardwired to respond to uncertainty. Your reaction is what fuels or deflates their sense of power. Recognizing ghosting for what it truly is, an orchestrated act rooted in the narcissist's shadow and need for control, enables you to maintain composure, preserve dignity, and ultimately reclaim authority over your own emotional space. The disappearance is theirs, the response is yours. How you choose to act in that vacuum defines the real dynamic of power. When you refused to chase, when you didn't scramble to fill the void left by their disappearance, something profound occurred, something the narcissist often cannot process consciously. You activated their shadow, and this activation is rooted deeply in the human psyche, a concept Carl Jung explored extensively. The shadow is the part of the psyche we repress, deny, or refuse to acknowledge. It contains everything we disown about ourselves: weaknesses, insecurities, fears, and traits that do not fit the image we want the world to see. For the narcissist, whose identity is built on control, admiration, and the appearance of invulnerability, the shadow is massive. It is composed of everything they do not allow themselves to feel: emotional emptiness, inadequacy, rejection, and fear of being unworthy. When you walked away, you became the mirror that reflected that shadow back to them, forcing them to confront parts of themselves they habitually suppress. Narcissists rely on projection to avoid engaging with their own shadows. Projection is a psychological defense mechanism in which they attribute their undesirable traits, insecurities, or emotions onto others. If they feel anger, they claim others are hostile. If they feel inadequacy, they label others as weak. By projecting, they maintain a sense of control over the image they present to the world, reinforcing their illusion of perfection or dominance. But when you refused to chase, you interrupted the projection cycle. You refused to participate in the role they had scripted for you, the role of the anxious, dependent, or desperate pursuer. By walking away calmly and without drama, you made it impossible for them to project onto you. Suddenly, the traits they disown could no longer find a target. Their own shadow, long hidden behind manipulation and illusion, was exposed by your refusal to chase. This exposure triggers deep psychological discomfort in the narcissist. They experience a type of shock because the world is no longer conforming to their expectations. Everything they orchestrated to maintain control, every silent manipulation, every ghost, every emotional tug, has failed to elicit the predictable reaction. For a personality built on control and predictable patterns of others' behavior, this is destabilizing. The narcissist is confronted with a dissonance they cannot easily reconcile. The external world does not mirror their inner narrative, and the person they thought they could manipulate is autonomous, grounded, and unaffected. This confrontation is felt viscerally. It hits them in their nervous system, not just their mind. Your calm withdrawal forces them to confront their feelings of powerlessness, inadequacy, and the deep fear of being irrelevant. Jung described the shadow not as something evil, but as a natural component of the psyche that contains what we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. In the narcissist, the shadow is magnified because their ego is so rigidly constructed around control, admiration, and validation. Every act of manipulation, every ghosting behavior, every effort to dominate is a compensatory mechanism to suppress the awareness of inadequacy. When you refused to chase, you essentially removed the scaffolding that allowed them to maintain that compensatory structure. Their shadow, previously hidden and controlled, suddenly becomes apparent because they can no longer rely on you to stabilize it externally. They are confronted with aspects of themselves that are frightening and destabilizing. Fear of loss, fear of irrelevance, and the uncomfortable reality that they do not have absolute power over your emotional state. Your refusal to chase also highlights the narcissist's dependency on external validation. Despite their facade of self-sufficiency, narcissists are paradoxically dependent on others to reinforce their self-image. They need reactions, attention, admiration, and submission to feel whole. When you refuse to provide these, you broke a crucial feedback loop that underpins their sense of identity. Without the expected responses, the narcissist is forced to face the absence of the validation they rely on so heavily. Their shadow, the awareness of inner emptiness and vulnerability, is triggered because it cannot be externally ignored. You became the mirror they did not want to face, and the reflection was unsettling. Moreover, your calm departure created cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs when reality conflicts with deeply held beliefs or expectations. The narcissist believes that their manipulations will always yield predictable outcomes. When this belief is contradicted by your inaction and composure, it creates an internal tension they cannot easily resolve. They expected anxiety, pursuit, or pleading. They received none of it. Instead, they are confronted with a reality in which their power does not dominate. This inconsistency between expectation and reality forces the narcissist to look inward, albeit unconsciously, and face the parts of themselves they habitually deny. The act of walking away also activates a primal fear in the narcissist: abandonment. While they may consciously present themselves as untouchable, their psyche experiences a deep, often unconscious dread of being truly left behind, of losing influence over someone who was emotionally invested in them. By refusing to chase, you touched that fear directly. You demonstrated that they cannot control your attachment and that your presence is not dependent on their whims. This threatens the delicate illusion they maintain of omnipotence and superiority. In the absence of control, the shadow swells, revealing vulnerabilities they cannot articulate and cannot tolerate being exposed. Your behavior also forces the narcissist to confront the limits of their strategies. Ghosting, manipulation, and emotional coercion are effective only when the target plays along. By refusing to chase, you removed the predictability that allows these strategies to work. They can no longer rely on reflexive responses or emotional scripts. They must engage with a reality they are unequipped to handle, someone who is independent, self-respecting, and unshaken. This confrontation with an unpredictable reality is a direct activation of the shadow because it exposes the limitations and fragility of their constructed persona. It creates internal shock because the narcissist has been accustomed to people reacting according to their designs, not asserting autonomy and setting boundaries. Another important aspect is the psychological concept of mirroring. Narcissists constantly seek mirrors that reflect their desired self-image. They want admiration, compliance, and attention that validates their sense of superiority. When you refuse to chase, you refuse to be the mirror they rely on. Instead, you reflect reality back to them, the truth that they do not control you, that their presence is not essential, and that your life continues without their validation. This reflection is profoundly uncomfortable because it forces the narcissist to confront their own unmet needs, insecurities, and fears. The mirror you hold up exposes the void they work so hard to conceal, and the sight of it triggers discomfort, confusion, and sometimes panic. Refusing to chase also communicates boundaries without confrontation. Narcissists often respond to confrontation or assertion with manipulation or escalation. But walking away in silence and composure bypasses their reactive mechanisms. You do not give them material to manipulate. You do not create tension that they can exploit. Your behavior is an unspoken declaration. Your autonomy is non-negotiable. By setting this boundary calmly, you activate the narcissist's shadow because they cannot dominate or undermine it. Their sense of powerlessness is heightened precisely because it is not met with struggle, argument, or dramatic pursuit. Silence becomes more destabilizing than any fight could be. Additionally, your refusal to chase disrupts their habitual reinforcement cycles. Narcissists operate on repetition. They create patterns of behavior that feed their sense of control and validation. Ghosting followed by pursuit, emotional withdrawal followed by attention-seeking, these are predictable cycles that maintain their equilibrium. When you refuse to chase, you break the cycle. The repetition is interrupted. This interruption forces the narcissist to confront instability they are not accustomed to managing. The shadow, which thrives in the spaces where control fails, emerges as a response. The more unexpected and controlled your withdrawal is, the more profound the activation of their internal shadow becomes. It is also crucial to recognize that narcissists' shadows are compounded by their fear of exposure. Their entire identity is structured around the image of competence, charm, and invulnerability. Any event that threatens to reveal weakness or vulnerability triggers their shadow. By refusing to chase, you indirectly expose the fragility beneath their constructed persona. They are forced to acknowledge, even unconsciously, that their strategies are not omnipotent. Their ego's defenses are inadequate against someone who prioritizes self-respect over their manipulative games. The shock they experience is not about your actions alone, it is about the mirror you hold that reflects their hidden fears and inadequacies. Furthermore, your calm and composed withdrawal communicates psychological sovereignty. Sovereignty is the ability to remain centered and unaffected by external manipulations. Narcissists thrive on reactions. They feed on emotional turbulence in others because it reinforces their sense of relevance and power. When you refuse to react, when you maintain your composure, you deny them their usual sources of validation. This forces them to confront the inadequacy of their usual tactics and triggers their shadow. The more composed and unmoved you remain, the more profound the disruption to their psychological equilibrium. They experience a rare sensation, the realization that not everyone is governed by their influence. The activation of the shadow is also a subtle but powerful form of psychological feedback. Narcissists rarely receive honest reflections because most people react with submission, anger, or emotional reactivity. By walking away without chasing, you provide a form of feedback they cannot ignore: your autonomy, self-respect, and indifference to their manipulations. This feedback forces an internal reckoning. Their disown traits, insecurities, fear of irrelevance, dependency on validation, become unavoidable. The shadow does not respond well to being confronted, which explains why the narcissist is shocked, unsettled, or even obsessive in attempting to understand your behavior after the fact. It is important to emphasize that your actions do not need to be dramatic or performative. The power lies in restraint, in calmness, and in consistency. The narcissist's shadow is activated not by confrontation, not by argument, and not by pursuit, but by the realization that you are not available to be manipulated. You did not give them the predictable patterns they rely on. You removed yourself from their control entirely, and in doing so, you forced them to confront the parts of themselves they habitually deny. That is why they are shocked. Your walking away is not just a physical departure, it is a psychological jolt. Finally, this activation has lasting implications. When a narcissist is forced to confront their shadow, even unconsciously, it disrupts their habitual functioning. They cannot easily return to their default behaviors because the equilibrium they rely on has been disturbed. They may attempt to reassert control in other ways, escalate manipulation with others, or become obsessed with understanding what happened. But the initial shock, the confrontation with the disowned shadow, is irreversible. Your refusal to chase created a boundary they cannot cross, a mirror they cannot avoid, and a psychological reality they cannot fully control. In essence, by refusing to chase and walking away, you did far more than protect yourself emotionally. You triggered the narcissist's shadow, the disowned, uncomfortable, and vulnerable part of their psyche. You removed the scaffolding that allowed their manipulations to function. You exposed their dependence on external validation and the fragility beneath their constructed persona. You shattered their expectations, disrupted their cycles, and demonstrated psychological sovereignty. And all of this, achieved through calm presence, detachment, and self-respect, leaves them shocked, not because they were hurt, but because they were confronted with themselves in a way they cannot easily escape. You became the mirror, and the reflection they saw was one they could neither control nor ignore. Mature masculine power is a concept that transcends mere physical strength or social dominance. It is psychological, emotional, and deeply rooted in the ability to maintain internal sovereignty regardless of external circumstances. When a narcissist ghosts you and you refuse to chase, the power you demonstrate is not loud or performative. It is quiet, grounded, and unwavering. It is a form of authority that does not require explanation, justification, or negotiation. It is the kind of power that comes from understanding your own value, setting unshakable boundaries, and refusing to give your energy to those who do not deserve it. This is the essence of mature masculine appeal. Strength without neediness, presence without demand, and detachment without coldness. It is a force that, while silent, is profoundly felt by everyone around you, especially those who have tried to manipulate or control you. The foundation of mature masculine power is self-respect. Self-respect is not about ego, pride, or showing off superiority. It is about knowing who you are, what you deserve, and what behaviors you will accept in your life. It is the understanding that your emotional energy is valuable and finite, and it cannot be coerced, manipulated, or stolen by anyone, including a narcissist. When the narcissist realizes that you will not compromise your self-respect to chase them, their expectations of control are shattered. They are accustomed to people bending, apologizing, and seeking their attention, but you refuse to participate. This refusal communicates more than words ever could. It communicates that your center is self-generated, not dependent on their validation. Your self-respect acts as a psychological anchor. It signals to them that they no longer hold the reins of your emotional world. Restraint is a core component of mature masculine power. Restraint is the ability to remain composed in situations where the norm would be to react emotionally. When a narcissist ghosts, the default reaction is often anxiety, anger, or panic. The immature response is to chase, argue, or seek explanations. But restraint transforms the dynamic. By walking away calmly without drama or explanation, you reclaim agency. Your energy is not reactive, it is intentional. The narcissist who relies on predictable emotional responses to feel powerful is confronted with the unexpected. This lack of reaction is disorienting and destabilizing. They experience a psychological shock because the tools they normally wield, manipulation, guilt, provocation, no longer function. Your restraint demonstrates an internal strength that cannot be coerced, threatened, or stolen. Non-attachment is another pillar of mature masculine power. Non-attachment does not mean indifference or coldness. It means being fully present, emotionally grounded, and engaged with life without being dependent on anyone for validation, love, or attention. By refusing to chase, you exhibit non-attachment to the narcissist's approval or recognition. You do not derive your sense of worth from their presence. Your emotional state is autonomous. This is profoundly unsettling to a narcissist because it violates the fundamental rules of their psychological games. They are accustomed to creating emotional leverage over others, but non-attachment renders that leverage ineffective. By walking away without agitation, you communicate that your energy, attention, and life are not theirs to manipulate. This message, though silent, resonates more powerfully than any argument or confrontation. Consistency is a subtle but critical aspect of mature masculine appeal. A narcissist thrives on unpredictability, on creating instability that allows them to dominate. When you consistently maintain your boundaries, remain composed, and refuse to chase, you create an environment where manipulation is impossible. Your behavior becomes predictable in its integrity, but unpredictable to them in its resistance to their scripts. This consistency strengthens your presence and reinforces your power. It communicates that your principles are unshakable and your emotional autonomy is non-negotiable. In this space, the narcissist's usual tactics fail and their shadow is forced to confront itself. They are shocked because the dynamic they relied upon for control no longer exists, and there is nothing they can do to recreate it. Silence is a strategic tool in mature masculine power. Silence is not avoidance, it is presence. When you choose not to explain, not to justify, and not to chase, you maintain control over your energy. Silence creates space for reflection, both within yourself and in the mind of the narcissist. It communicates confidence without words and sets boundaries without aggression. Narcissists who rely on dialogue to provoke, manipulate, and extract emotional responses are unsettled by silence. Your withdrawal is a mirror that reflects back their lack of power and inability to control. The shock they feel is amplified because silence cannot be argued with, bargained over, or emotionally hijacked. It simply exists, carrying the weight of your autonomy. Emotional regulation is essential to sustaining mature masculine power. The narcissist attempts to hijack your emotions to reinforce their own sense of superiority. They provoke, manipulate, and test your reactions because your emotional instability feeds their ego. By walking away calmly, without internalizing their provocations or reacting impulsively, you maintain control of your emotional state. You do not allow their behavior to dictate your feelings, and this is a profound demonstration of power. Emotional regulation transforms the encounter from a potential trap into a platform of sovereignty. The narcissist's attempts to destabilize you fail because you have mastered your internal world. This mastery is invisible yet tangible, and it is what shocks them the most. Mature masculine appeal also relies on clarity of purpose. A man who walks away from a narcissist without chasing does so because he knows his values, priorities, and boundaries. His actions are guided by principle rather than impulse. He does not seek revenge, retribution, or validation from his decision. The clarity comes from understanding what is acceptable and what is not, and choosing alignment over attachment. This clarity projects power because it communicates that you are not reactive to external chaos, you are guided by internal certainty. The narcissist perceives this certainty as dominance, even if no confrontation occurs. The shock they experience is a direct reflection of their inability to command influence over someone who operates from principle rather than emotion. Another facet of mature masculine power is self-possession. Self-possession is the deep understanding and acceptance of oneself, including one's strengths, weaknesses, and value. When you walk away from a narcissist without chasing, you demonstrate that your sense of self is independent of external validation. You are complete without needing them to affirm your worth. This demonstration of completeness is magnetic and intimidating simultaneously. Narcissists, who measure their influence by others' emotional dependence, are thrown off balance by someone who is emotionally whole and self-contained. Your self-possession acts as an invisible boundary, an unspoken rule that your energy is yours alone. It is in this space that the narcissist experiences the greatest shock because their usual leverage is rendered meaningless. Mature masculine appeal is also reflected in the avoidance of unnecessary drama. Many people respond to narcissistic games with high emotional energy, argument, or desperation, inadvertently reinforcing the narcissist's sense of power. Walking away without chasing avoids feeding the drama cycle. It communicates that you are not a participant in the chaos they create. Your calmness, detachment, and refusal to chase are forms of invisible authority. By not engaging in the drama, you reclaim your time, energy, and focus. You demonstrate that your life is governed by your own standards and priorities, not by the manipulations of someone seeking control. This demonstration of authority, though subtle, is often more impactful than any confrontation or verbal assertion. The power also lies in restraint paired with timing. The narcissist may anticipate immediate reactions, emotional messages, or confrontational pursuit. By choosing not to respond in the expected timeframe, or not to respond at all, you assert control over your availability. Time becomes a tool of authority. You decide where, when, and if engagement occurs. The narcissist, accustomed to dictating emotional interactions, is shocked because the temporal dynamic is now under your command. Your autonomy over time, combined with emotional sovereignty, creates an unassailable form of psychological power. Mature masculine power manifests in the ability to project calm confidence without needing to announce it. You do not need to explain why you are walking away. You do not need to justify your boundaries or your choice to disengage. Your presence and composure communicate the message without words. This silent communication is potent because it bypasses rationalization and speaks directly to perception. Narcissists, who rely on manipulation and conversation to exert influence, are unprepared for the authority inherent in quiet confidence. Your silence, combined with deliberate withdrawal, communicates strength, independence, and self-possession. It is this subtlety that is so shocking, power that does not need to shout, argue, or prove itself. Walking away also demonstrates a mastery of desire and need. Mature masculine appeal is not about suppressing emotion or pretending indifference. It is about prioritizing alignment, self-respect, and autonomy over fleeting gratification. When a narcissist seeks to provoke pursuit, the impulse is to react, to chase, to plead, to reassert connection. By refusing this impulse, you exhibit mastery over neediness. You communicate that your actions are guided by principle rather than desperation. The shock experienced by the narcissist comes from witnessing someone who refuses to be emotionally enslaved by their games. This demonstration of emotional sovereignty is one of the most profound signals of mature masculine appeal. Another layer of this power is self-awareness. Mature masculine individuals understand the psychological mechanisms at play when dealing with manipulative personalities. You are aware of the narcissist's strategies, projections, and expectations. You understand the stakes, the potential traps, and the outcomes of engagement. This awareness allows you to act strategically without emotional compromise. By walking away, you utilize knowledge as a form of power. Your understanding of human behavior and psychological dynamics informs your actions, creating a controlled environment where the narcissist's usual tactics cannot penetrate. They are confronted not only with your boundaries but also with your competence and clarity, amplifying the shock they experience. Furthermore, mature masculine appeal includes the integration of the shadow, the acknowledgement and acceptance of one's own flaws, fears, and vulnerabilities. By walking away without chasing, you demonstrate internal completeness. You are not seeking validation to cover insecurity. Your identity and emotional stability are self-contained. Narcissists whose shadows are often massive and repressed recognize this integration, consciously or unconsciously. Your completeness becomes a mirror reflecting the incompleteness and fragility they have long suppressed. The resulting cognitive dissonance, the realization that someone can be whole, autonomous, and unaffected by their manipulation, creates psychological shock and disruption. The act of walking away also communicates a lesson in respect. Respect in this context is both self-respect and the implicit expectation of being treated appropriately. Mature masculine appeal does not demand respect, it commands it through behavior. By refusing to chase, you signal that emotional exploitation, manipulation, and absence will not be tolerated. You are not reacting emotionally to their absence, you are maintaining alignment with your principles. Narcissists are shocked because their usual leverage, the combination of absence and provocation, no longer functions. Respect is earned through boundaries and integrity, not submission or compliance. Finally, mature masculine power is ultimately about freedom, freedom from dependency, manipulation, and emotional coercion. By walking away without chasing, you reclaim control over your life, your attention, and your emotional energy. You are free to live according to your values, priorities, and standards rather than being drawn into someone else's game. This freedom is the ultimate demonstration of power, because it cannot be taken, manipulated, or undermined. The narcissist experiences shock because the dynamic they have relied upon for control, validation, and influence has been irreversibly altered. Your autonomy, self-possession, and composure establish a form of authority that is invisible yet undeniable. A mature masculine power that transforms the interaction without confrontation, argument, or drama. In essence, mature masculine power is a combination of self-respect, restraint, non-attachment, emotional regulation, consistency, self-possession, clarity of purpose, and awareness. When you walk away from a narcissist without chasing, you embody these qualities fully. Your behavior becomes a mirror reflecting their shadow, a disruption of their manipulative cycles, and a demonstration of psychological sovereignty. They are shocked not because you have acted aggressively or retaliated, but because you have acted from a place of internal alignment, autonomy, and authority. The silent power of your withdrawal communicates more than words ever could, leaving them confronted, unsettled, and profoundly aware of the limits of their influence. Your refusal to chase is not merely a reaction. It is a deliberate assertion of dominance through composure, presence, and self-mastery, the hallmarks of mature masculine appeal.